The box of tomatoes sits half-rotted on the kitchen table. Sunlight cuts a hard rectangle onto Eleanor's hands as she wipes dirt from under her nails and folds the stems into neat bundles, an old ritual she does because it keeps memory alive. In the distance, the city breathes, a sustained hum of engines, a train clanging, a dog barking. None of it belongs to her. Her world has always been measured in seasons and the soft, dependable routines of small-town mornings. Now she wakes on floorboards that don't creak the same way, under a skylight with a view of strangers' roofs. Eleanor arrives in the condo like someone stepping into a showroom, everything polished, everything arranged to impress. Julian opens the door in a crisp suit and a smile that is practiced behind it. His hand on her elbow is efficient, as if he's escorting a prized object down a catwalk. Clara moves among the furniture like a stillness painted into motion, careful, smiling, making tea with an economy of gesture that never quite reaches her eyes. The first day is a choreography: new slippers, a labeled drawer, small gifts wrapped in considerate paper. They call her Mom in the way people call out to neighbors. They perform family. Eleanor's voice is small in the open-plan kitchen, and so she speaks quietly. There is relief in luxury, but there is also a thinness, some essential thing that belonged to the old house. The smell of boiled cabbages, the way rain hit the porch roof in a language she could read. Here, the walls are soundproofed. The silence is manufactured. She notes the brass fixtures, the remote controls, the art that cost money she'll never understand. Her late husband's photograph sits in her suitcase rather than on a mantel. She has not brought him to this place. Even without his body, the years of survival press against her ribs like a remembered bruise. They show her room like a stagehand revealing a set. A window overlooks a park where joggers pass with practiced strides. "You'll be safe," Julian says. "Everything you need is right here." Clara leans in with a practice cheer. "We'll take you out. I'll make sure you get to meet everyone." The kettle whistles. Eleanor pours herself a cup and smiles through an old ache. Safety is a commodity here, measured in sensors and key cards. It comforts her. The first nights, she sleeps like a guest whose mattress is too soft. She wakes with a neck ache and the odd feeling that she took the wrong train. On the third night, a sound threads through the hush in the building and pulls her awake. Water, a steady, cold torrent beating against porcelain. The clock on the nightstand reads 3 o'clock. Eleanor sits up slowly. The sound is unnatural at that hour, ritualistic, deliberate, and for a moment she is an old teacher solving a problem at the chalkboard. Pattern recognition. Once, long ago, water had been a punishment in their yard. Buckets, a face pushed under, the brutal choreography of a man making amends by drowning out his conscience. Eleanor tells herself it's nothing, a restless sun, a cleansing shower. But the sound lodges in her like a pebble in shoe leather. She breathes, stays quiet, and the apartment returns to sleep. Outside, the city's heartbeat continues, unaware. Eleanor rises anyway. She goes to the balcony, places her palms on the cold rail, and studies the lamplit windows across the way. People sleep in frames of light. She wants privacy as much as she wants to belong. The tomatoes she left on the table compost quietly. The past will not be boxed and shipped away. In the bright living room, Clara's perfume lingers like a promise, and the bathroom door is a thin barrier separating comfort from a sound that will not leave her alone. Eleanor keeps a list in her head, small, practical observations she tells herself are only curiosity. Julian leaves early, a man with a glass of ambition. Clara opens the windows to let a thin breeze through, folding each curtain with an almost ritual respect. Julian's laughter comes in measured bursts at dinner, the kind practiced with colleagues. Later, he walks past Eleanor's door as if she were a decorative object. At first, the oddities are slips. A hurried hand that lingers on Clara's wrist, a brusque word when a plate cools, an apology swallowed before it is said. Clara smiles and apologizes, always small, grateful at being fed, praised for her thrift. There is a rhythm here that is polite on the surface and tight underneath, like a drum wound too tight. Eleanor's lungs remember a different tune. Old warning bells, subtle, elemental, start to toll when she notices patterns. An unexplained bruise on Clara's wrist masked with a sleeve. Eyes too quick to look away when a question focuses, like a lens. Once, while helping with groceries, Eleanor finds a pressed-down patch of skin, purple fading to yellow, in the hollow by Clara's elbow. Clara stumbles for a reason that is clumsy and rehearsed. Eleanor's teacher's brain catalogs shapes and causes. Her life catalogs threats and responses. She has learned to read language in broken things. During the days, kindness is a practice performance. Julian purchases vitamins in bulk and insists on measuring Eleanor's blood pressure with an exactness that feels like surveillance. He leaves helpful notes on the fridge. But at night the building's hush is broken again, and again by that same sound, water cutting into the small hours at the same, precise time. Each prickle of listening rewrites the map of Eleanor's nights. She starts setting a little alarm under her pillow as if to catch a ghost in the act. Some nights the water is louder, pounding with a metallic fury. Other nights it comes on like someone trying to erase a memory by sheer repetition. The timing makes it uncanny. 3 o'clock, like a clock someone set to remind a conscience. Eleanor moves from observation to a softer vigilance. She watches Clara's hands fold napkins with fingers that betray a tremor. Once, Clara wipes a teardrop away from the corner of her eye and laughs, blaming pollen. She tells lighter stories about having been a teacher herself, but her voice is thin at the edges. When she speaks about leaving her job to become a wife, there is a small silence that Eleanor recognizes not as contentment, but as loss. Clara's past is a shadow that the condo's sunlight cannot reach. A turning moment arrives in the shape of a broken cup. A simple domestic accident, a bowl slipped, a plate shattered, becomes a meteor of consequence. Julian's response is swift and disproportionate, a furrowed brow, a snarl, a hand that drops like thunder. He recovers and speaks loving words the next moment, smoothing the calendar back into the right week. This is the pattern Eleanor knows too well, an explosion, a wash, a promise. There is artifice to Julian's gentleness. Eleanor finds herself bristling, not for herself this time, but for the woman who looks at her across the breakfast table with a trust that seems to have been cauterized by fear. Her past acts like a prism. Memories of bruises and excuses refract into present moments. Clara's sudden quiet, her careful makeup, her furtive text messages. Eleanor's body remembers how to hide. She had shielded a child with whispers and bruises long ago. Now the roles are reversed. She is both protector and culprit for the silence she once kept. She begins to speak to herself in the imperative tense. Notice, remember, prepare. She writes small things on a pad she keeps tucked in a drawer. Times, odd words, stray apologies. Each entry is a breadcrumb, leading away from denial and towards something dangerous. The admission that Julian's polished exterior might hide a very old, familiar violence. At night, the shower comes again at 3, and the sound has moved from background noise to accusation. Eleanor's chest tightens in a way that is both fear and readiness. She keeps watching, she keeps listening. The city continues to sleep. Inside the condo, the truth is assembling itself like a puzzle on a table, and Eleanor knows that if the pieces fit, the picture will be terrible. The bathroom door is never fully closed. It is a small negligence, the kind the house allows, an ever-so sliver of light like the crack in a dam. That night Eleanor moves like a shadow. Each step is slow, controlled. Decades of habit in classrooms and corridors have tuned her to silence. At the sliver of the door, she pauses and breathes. The sound of water is a thin blade against the hush of tiled floors. And then she sees him. Julian stands tall in pajamas that cling with wetness. The steam grips the light and bends it around the two of them. Clara is before him beneath the shower, her nightdress plastered to her ribs, her hair flattened into a dark map across her cheeks. One hand jerks at his hold on her hair, the other hangs limply, fingers white. Julian's face is not the practiced composure of daytime diplomacy. This face holds an old, private cruelty, a ledger he has kept in secret. He lifts a hand and slaps her. The sound knifes through the water like a bell. Clara's body folds but does not rise. She makes a small, soft sound that is half beg and half apology. Eleanor's first impulse is the animal response she thought she had left behind, to intervene, fling herself between predator and prey. But the body remembers more than courage. It remembers the years of learned submission when a single movement could make things worse, the years when stepping forward invited a retaliation that would break more than bone. Her feet betray her. She turns away and runs to her room, to the hollow that fear has always been built from. She covers her head with the comforter, like a child with a secret. The water drums out its regular rhythm. Eleanor hears a memory overwrite a scene she is currently witnessing, her husband's hand forcing her face into a metal basin, the water assaulting her like repentance. She stares at those years like an old scar does at moonlight. She remembers how speech failed her. The next morning, daylight pretends everything belongs to the living. Julian moves with practiced charm. "I was restless," he says lightly when Eleanor asks about the night's shower. His eyes avoid a corner. Clara's fingers tremble as she pours cereal, but she laughs at some small thing Julian says, and the sound is fragile as a paper boat. Eleanor's shame roils inside her. She thinks of calling the police, of a confrontation that could unmake the lives assembled in that living room. She considers small acts of sabotage, a misfiled document, a delay, and larger acts, speeches, accusations, the raw, terrible truth yelled into a hush. Night becomes a wound that will not close. Eleanor watches Clara as if cataloging a specimen. She sees the places where makeup layers thin, and the skin explains what words will not. In the daytime, she composes herself into the grandmotherly role, making scones, folding napkins, being ordinary. At night, she collects information, taking notes in a small pocketbook. She sits outside the bathroom door with the recorder app open once, and then quickly stops when Julian passes by, and his eyes meet hers with a flash of something keen and private, an awareness she cannot name. The meeting of those eyes stops her again. The old lesson is not gone. Domestic violence contains a grammar of intimidation that includes surveillance, restriction, and humiliation. Eleanor is fluent. Then something cracks. A neighbor's superficial kindness becomes an opportunity. While bringing a small plate of muffins across the hall, Clara drops her bag, and a small stack of hospital appointment cards spills out. Julian's name is on top. They are not for him. They are for a checkup Clara has been postponing, pregnancy tests, a consultation for an ultrasound. The cards slide like evidence across the floor. In the air between them, something shifts. Eleanor sees Clara's face change from practiced peace to a flicker of panic and then resignation. She sees the life she had been denied, one in which Clara might have a future apart from Julian, a child, a small home. That night, the water is gone. The absence is worse than the sound. Eleanor sits on the balcony and lets the city inhale. Her mind has split into halves, shame and duty, cowardice and resolve. She thinks again of the little notebook. She thinks of the old teacher's voice that taught children how to make an argument using facts. She thinks of the quiet, grinding power of documentation. She has not been able to confront the man with the face of her son, but she understands evidence. If she cannot stop the beating with her body, she can arm the truth. The halfway point is not a single decision but a stacking of small commitments, to watch without being seen, to record, to gather, to wait for a moment where memory will side with law. Eleanor sleeps poorly. She dreams of running, of hands that will not let go. When she wakes, her chest has been reshaped. Fear remains, but beneath it is a stubble of resolve, like new shoots after fire. The plan will be slow, careful, and dangerous. She will become an archivist of cruelty, a midwife of evidence. The horror she witnessed remains a hinge. It will open to either collapse or action. They begin small. Eleanor teaches Clara how to tuck a phone into the hem of a skirt and set it to record. They place a tiny camera behind a vase on Clara's bedside table that, by luck or design, captures angles Julian doesn't expect. Eleanor learns an unexpected thrill in the clandestine, Assembling a case is like piecing a lecture. One fact follows the next into an inevitable conclusion. Every bruise photographed, every clipped voice recording, every diary entry is filed into a secret email account that only the two of them can open. It is tedious work and it is intimate. They stitch a rope out of paper and sound. At first the police are inert. Reports filed are politely noted and then shelved under family dispute. Julian's affluence buys him the kind of credibility money often buys. A polished resume, convincing friends, a lawyer who speaks of stress and marital turbulence. The two women learn the unpleasant arithmetic of how influence blunts the leg. Mr. Liu, the attorney Eleanor contacts, is steady and exacting. He shows them how to turn a litany of small horrors into a coherent legal narrative. Gathering financial records, marital documents, bank statements, they feel invasive and necessary, like searching a shared closet for hidden evidence. Julian's law team answers with obfuscation and professional contempt. He is the good son in the public eye. Privately, he is a different ledger. The retaliation is quick. When Clara reaches for a notebook in the living room, Julian's eyes flare. He calls her incompetent, belittles her, and then throws her phone across the floor. It is a rehearsal of power. Remove communication, isolate, shame. He calls Eleanor meddlesome, in a tone meant to wound publicly. Eleanor responds differently now. The memory of running under a coverlet has been replaced with a curated courage. She refuses to be silenced. She tells Julian she has engaged a lawyer. He laughs like a trapped animal. "You can't go against me," he says. The laugh is brittle, the first sign that his empire has fractures. The legal battle grinds on and exposes ugly things. Julian's team produces dubious medical notes claiming Clara's bruises were self-inflicted. They point to gaps in the recordings. They raise the specter of a woman scorned, scheming. Clara nearly collapses under the strain of gaslighting made official. The courtrooms smell of paper and coffee and dread as the process chews at her resolve. Eleanor holds firm in the wings, a silent chronicler, but the pain claws at her. At night, she sleeps with the recorder beside her heart. Each incoming email from Clara sets her breath racing. A new picture, a new audio clip, a notation. Then comes the seizure point where their careful strategy collides with raw violence. Clara decides to file formally. She chooses a night and speaks the words aloud. "I want a divorce." Julian hears those words as if they were an accusation spoken into a sacred place. He moves like someone who believes punishment is a lesson. He strikes with a violence that shocks even those familiar with his rages, drags Clara into a hallway, and locks her in a bedroom. He takes the phone. He leaves a voicemail to Eleanor that is a promise. "If you don't stop, you won't have a family left." It reads like a threat carved into cold marble. Eleanor's world tilts. The lawyers rush. The police file a report and happenstance becomes urgency. Mr. Liu moves through bureaucracy like a surgeon, pulling requisitions, making direct demands, and placing calls that turn polite indifference into restless action. The case becomes a rescue, no longer merely adversarial. Officers arrive, but this is Julian's domain. He has polished every edge to a sheen. The rescue is messy and terrifying. Clara is found in shock, barely able to stand, her hair tangled, bruises new and raw. The hospital documents everything. The evidence pile, once fragile and flimsy, becomes a mound that refuses to be denied. On the way to court, Eleanor thinks of the woman she once had been, subdued, careful about how she wore her face. Today she is steady as a column. She has learned how to translate fear into an instrument. Documentation, testimony, the patient accumulation of proofs. In the press of people and paper, she finds a line of cold clarity. They are not simply fighting for money or for vindication. They are fighting for a living soul. The stage is set. Everything now moves toward a single hinge, whether law and public proof will answer for private cruelty. At the center of this pressure, Eleanor senses the old arc of her life bending. The battle will expose family truths in a public forum. It will spill shame, anger, and grief onto record. Whatever happens next will change the architecture of all their lives. The courtroom is quieter than the condo ever was. It hums with bureaucracy and the kind of civility that paper produces. Julian's suit sits firm among his defense team. He is a portrait of controlled outrage. Clara moves slowly into the witness box, clutching a tissue like a rosary of protection. Eleanor sits in the gallery, her hands folded over the small recorder that contains months of disaster and proof. Mr. Liu is a composed presence at their table. The judge's gaze is steady, and the gallery is full of people who have come for the spectacle and those who have come for justice. The balance of the case has been precarious up to this moment. Claims versus counterclaims, shaky forensics, and enough doubt to keep a culpable man afloat. But the final piece has arrived and will change everything. Before the day's testimonies, a technician calls and says there is new evidence coming from an unlikely source. A resident in the adjacent building reviewed their new hallway camera footage. The clip shows a violent encounter in the condo hallway, a public space, in plain sight, captured in cold, steady clarity. Someone had positioned the lens to cover communal corridors and caught Julian dragging Clara into the open, striking and menacing her in a way his polished persona could not deny. The footage is grainy but brutally honest. It is not subject to interpretation. Mr. Liu plays the clip. The screen fills the room with a private violence made public. The courtroom exhales. Julian's attorneys grow pale. He tries to laugh it off at first, a brittle noise that betrays panic. The tape shows the sequence of actions, harsh words, a shove, then a strike, while minute after minute the recording's audio syncs with the times of earlier recordings Eleanor had made. The corroboration is damning. The judge calls for a recess, and the defense scrambles to craft a narrative that could distort what the video plainly shows. For a moment, Julian's face convulses between rage and dread. Wealth and reputation are suddenly insufficient armor. Testimony follows, each piece an armature supporting the central claim. A nurse reads entries from hospital charts. A neighbor testifies to hearing shouting at precise hours. Clara's voice, when she speaks, is a fragile thread that grows stronger. She recounts small things that show the pattern. The late showers that were ritual apologies, the sharp retorts that arrived with Julian's mood shifts, the ways in which promises dissolved into pain. Her words are not melodramatic but precise. They are the declarations of someone finally permitted to name what was done to her. The defense tries to cast doubt. Voices can be edited. A tape might be selectively compiled. But the camera stands impartial, a witness that does not tire or fear. It shows no motive beyond what actually happened. The video becomes the axis around which the case turns. Julian's lawyer folds under the weight of unambiguous visual proof, and something in the defendant's posture unravels. He is no longer the man of measured charm, but a person exposed. The verdict is not only legal, it is moral. The judge's ruling, delivered with quiet force, orders dissolution of the marriage, awards Clara substantial assets and protective measures, and recommends criminal review for the assault caught on camera. Everyone in the courtroom feels the gravity. For Julian, it is ruin. Reputation flayed, family ties severed by public evidence of cruelty. For Clara, it is a raw, salvaged freedom. Eleanor weeps quietly. Her tears are not only for Clara but for herself, an elegy for the years she had kept silent, and a benediction for the courage she at last found. In the crowd, some faces show shock while others express a long overdue relief. The law has not erased the wounds, but it has provided a measure of change. As the gavel falls, the floodgates of words break open. Apologies, explanations, and the hiss of a life remade from pieces. Outside the courthouse, sunlight seems sharper, honest in a way it was not before. Clara holds Eleanor's hand and squeezes it like a promise. Julian leaves with his lawyers. His posture is diminished, hollowed by consequence. The climax is not merely a judicial ruling but an irrevocable reordering, truth captured in a frame, justice that smarts, and the beginning of a healing that will be slow but real. The city becomes an archive of small consolations. Clara moves into an apartment that she chooses with her hands, filling it with light rather than gilded objects. Her laughter finds a new place to land, less tentative, more durable. Eleanor spends mornings at the retirement community, where the gardeners know her name and neighbors trade stories like quilts. She visits Clara often. Sometimes they cook together. Sometimes they sit in companionable silence with tea and the low hum of an afternoon radio. They plant basil in little pots and watch sprouts of green promise that nothing, for once, will be forced into shape. Time softens the edges of the trial, but does not erase them. Clara bears scars, faint pale lines that catch sunlight, and the memory of hands that once gripped too tightly. She goes to therapy and works with a counselor who teaches her to name things that before had been shrugged away. Eleanor attends support groups, where she hears other women speak and learns that bravery is not a single act but a series of choices made in exhaustion. Together they trace a map of survival that is messy and ordinary and utterly human. One afternoon, Clara comes to Eleanor with a secret that blooms across her face. She is pregnant. The news arrives like rain after drought, a small, trembling miracle. They sit with hands braced around the future and try to hold steady the fragile hope. The city that once echoed with slamming doors now holds a new sound, laughter that grows confident, a lullaby learned in parts. Clara's pregnancy becomes a bridge, a reclaimed creation in the face of violence that once sought to deprive her of everything. It is not an erasure of loss, nor should it be, but it is a luminous counterpoint. Julian calls once, his voice thick with a contrition that feels like a costume. He pleads for reconciliation and swears to change. Eleanor listens and remembers the shower, the slaps that echoed like a bell, the smell of distilled fear. She refuses him quietly, with a calmness that surprises her. "You had your chances," she says. "You had your life. This family is being remade without your cruelty." Julian's protests die against the wall of facts and consequence. Clara makes a choice that surprises no one who knows her now. She asks Eleanor if she will be the child's grandmother in every way that matters. Not a legal adoption at first, but a naming of truth, an adoption of love. Eleanor's breath catches. She thinks of the son she raised. She thinks of the man he might have been. Then she thinks of this young woman who is brave enough to speak and who is now carrying a life that will know a different tenderness. She says yes, and the word is a bomb. It stitches the raggedness of her history into something reparable. The ending is not triumphant in the way of fairy tales. There is no miraculous erasure of pain. Money does not indemnify trauma. Apologies do not undo strikes. But there is repair, paperwork for custody, legal settlements that secure resources, therapy that teaches boundaries, and a daily practice of reknitting trust. Eleanor keeps planting tomatoes in a window box outside Clara's new kitchen. They are small and stubborn and imperfect, but they grow. When the child arrives, Eleanor holds the tiny hands with reverence and sings a nursery rhyme she remembers from a classroom long ago. She has kept her voice soft and steady. It is full of the hard-earned tenderness born of surviving. In her journal, Eleanor writes one last entry before the story closes. "We did not save ourselves alone." The sentence is both confession and benediction. She has lost a son to his own darkness, but she has gained a daughter and a grandchild and, with them, a life of quiet courage. The final shot is simple. Sunlight pooling on a kitchen table, a small tomato ripening beside a tiny pair of socks. The camera lingers on the ordinary beauty of it, and the frame holds the quiet truth. Safety is a practice, not a promise, and some families are made by vows that outlast blood.